Have I ever read the Bible?
No.
I haven't read the Bible.
For my own reasons, no.
I've skimmed it.
I have read the Bible.
I kind of looked at little segments, but I've never actually attempted to read the whole thing.
It's not advertised enough. Like, I don't go to church, so the time when I do read it is when I'm in church. But other than that, I don't have a copy of the Bible. Yeah.
They're interesting stories, like as a guide for people how to live, not necessarily taken literally.
I thought it was daunting.
It's been a long time, so I don't really remember everything.
Story of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, Adam and Eve.
Like stories about Jesus and his life.
Up there, of course, there's Genesis.
I don't know the difference between sort of like the different books and stuff, but I do know Genesis is the first one. Or is that an argument? I don't know.
Good evening. I don't know if that's your opinion of the Bible when anyone's talked to you about the Bible or that book that's in front of you in the chairs. Do you normally think, goodness me, it's so outdated, it's so boring, it's full of contradictions, it's full of weird stuff, it's really hard to understand the language, it's a rule book that I'm not interested in, and actually it's not relevant to me now, today. It's pathetic, really. If that's what you thought, that's what I did. Or that's what you think now. That's what I thought for over 39 years of my life. The first time I encountered the Bible was in a magistrate's courtroom in Manchester. I had to place my hand on it and say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Soon after that lie, I was given a prison sentence and sent to a prison in between Manchester and Liverpool called Risley. I was born into a really dysfunctional family, and if you know that, you know what that's like. Both my parents were alcoholics. Both were committed atheists, not interested in God at all. And both of them were from Liverpool, Toxteth, my father, and Birkenhead, Cheshire, Liverpool area, my mother. My father was in his prime 6'3". I mean, big and unpredictable. My mother, small and volcanic. She could just explode at any time. We lived in Manchester on a few estates, really. So my childhood, probably like someone here, was not a great time for me. I think having two alcoholic parents will knock most things out of you, especially any hope that you've got in life, I think, or certainly any hope in yourself. And it will also sort of knock your trust in people. You're not quite sure if you can trust anyone. At 15, for me, two things happened. One, I was expelled from a school I was going to. It was a comprehensive school in Manchester. It was really rough. I hated it. I was bullied there. And in the end, I was expelled for truancy. At the same time that happened, home wasn't too good either. I got into, in the middle of an argument with my mother and father. There was always arguments, especially at the weekend. And my father went to sort of hit my mother, and I stood in the gap, and all hell broke loose, really. And I ended up my father telling me to leave the house, and he threw me out. And in my arrogance, I ran upstairs, I grabbed the bag, I threw whatever was on my bed in it, and I ran out the door, and I got about 10 meters, and I had no idea where I was going. But I knew it just had to be better out there than it was in this house or this home, if you want to call it, I was living in. So homeless for a while, not long, but I've lived on the streets. Shortly after that, in Manchester, I moved into a squat, a house full of young men and women. It was a nightmare, and living in there, I was off the street, but I got into trouble in that house, mixing with people. It led me into crime, which over the next few years led to fines, court appearances, probation, bound over to keep the peace, fines, and different things like that. And in the end, I didn't really do any of that, and that's what happened. I ended up in prison. I came out of prison, and it frightened the life out of me, to be honest. It was a Borstal, young offenders sort of prison, and it was horrendous. So I wanted to go home. My parents didn't visit me while I was in there. And I headed home, and only to find that my parents had moved and someone else was living in the house that I thought was ours. And I also found out later that they'd got divorced, separated, and gone their separate ways. It was then, while living in this one-room flat in Manchester, holding down 2 jobs, driving a truck during the day and working at a bar at night, trying to keep myself sort of busy and out of trouble. One day when I was driving this truck, a transit van, I saw a poster for the army. And it was brilliant marketing when I look back. It was this big poster. It was 2 soldiers in camouflage uniform. They were smiling. The backdrop was mountains with snow on the top, the blue skies, it was sunny, and they were skiing down this mountain. And it said, "Do you want a life of adventure? Then join the British Army." And that was it. I headed into the recruiting office, and after a lot of interviews because of the prison sentence and a lot of persuasion on my part, I finally had the opportunity to enlist into the British Army. That was the second time I'd ever encountered the Bible in my life. This Bible, which I've still got, this one, it's got a little note inside it. I had to put my hand on this on a desk in a recruiting office, and this time I had to swear allegiance to the crown. After I'd done that, I was given a day's pay, and my army career began. And this is the Bible that I did that. It says this book was used in the enlistment ceremony of Paul Cowley, on the enlistment into the British Army in Manchester on the 15th of the 1st, 1976. It is presented on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen for personal use as a source of spiritual and moral guidance during army service. That was one of the most exciting days of my life because someone had deemed to sort of trust me and see something in me that I couldn't see in myself. They wanted me in the army, and it was so exciting. So I was 21, I was posted to Germany, which meant I had to marry my girlfriend at the time. So we got married, and I got sent out to some obscure place in Germany. A year later, it wasn't going really well with me and my wife, and I thought, how can we fix this if we have a child? Then that will probably fix all that and bring it all together. So a year later, my son, Clinton, was born. Fantastic day when he was born. 3 years after that, 25, I couldn't really handle this responsibility of trying to be this married man, try to be this husband, this provider, and also trying to be this father to this young boy. I couldn't handle it. And so I got divorced, and I sent them packing back to the UK, and I didn't see my son, Clinton, which I'm not proud of, for over 10 years. Why? Well, because when I did go and see him, I'd be in uniform then, I'd go and see him, I'd pick him up, we'd have a brilliant day together, just me and him messing around. And then when I'd take him back, and I'd drop him off at the door, he would spontaneously burst into tears, obviously, and I couldn't handle it. This roughy, toughy sort of soldier just couldn't handle it, so I just binned it. And I never saw him for a very long time. At 27, I got married again, didn't like being on my own. At 29, another divorce. That was my life. Behind this bravado, there was pain, there was broken promises, there was broken relationships, there was drink, there was debt, there was divorce. And I think looking back, quiet despair, because I never shared it with anybody. The only stable thing I really had in my whole life was my military career, and I loved it, and I excelled in it. I spent the next 16 years doing anything that came my way. I volunteered for everything. I volunteered for postings, for courses. I volunteered for 2 tours of Northern Ireland in the mid-70s, which was a tricky place to be. I volunteered for the advance party to go down to the Falklands. I was in 4 different regiments, and my last regiment was Army Physical Training Corps, where I became a PE teacher, really, and a venture trainer. And eventually, probably after 12 years, I got to ski, which that poster excited me about. So the Army physically saved my life. It was amazing. It gave me a home, it fed me, it watered me, it showed me I could do things, it taught me leadership skills. It was fantastic. But morally and spiritually, I was completely bankrupt. I had absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. I left the army and started work in the fitness industry in London here. I became a personal trainer. I managed a couple of health clubs here in London. They were great jobs. all the toys, lots of money. It was fantastic. But do you know what? Or maybe you do know what. I was just restless all the time. Even though I had all the stuff, I was really restless. And a few years ago now, I walked in through those doors that you came in tonight to start an Alpha course. Why? I had no idea at the time. A friend had suggested it, whatever. I just said yeah to keep him happy. And I came in, and I absolutely had no reason why I was sat where you're sat now. Maybe that's like you. I struggled with some of the talks. I struggled with some of the speakers, the bits that they were saying. I wasn't really sure what was happening. I attended the weekend, which is coming up, which you heard about tonight. I didn't want to go on that at all. I was very resistant to that. Eventually, I went on because a group was going on, and I thought, whatever, I'll go with them. They're a nice gang. And it's at that seaside resort, which I didn't want to go to, that I had an encounter with God, which was a bit of a shock, probably for both of us. But for me, the shock for me is that I didn't think he would want to bother or be involved with anyone like me, because I know me. And I was surprised when I met him that he wasn't this vengeful, judgmental God that I'd heard my father and other people in the military talk about. I met his son, Jesus, which was a real shock for me, because he seemed to understand me and all the stuff I had and the stuff I'd done wrong. And he didn't judge me, didn't mind my background. He just loved me unconditionally. And that was a really big deal for me. And you know what? It still is, that he loves me unconditionally. Why? Because I know me, and he still loves me. And since that weekend, really my life started to change slowly, but it started to change. Some of my fears started to sort of disappear, just go away. I started to try and trust people again, which I hadn't done for many years. But most of all, it was me that was starting to change. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow process. I'm still changing, as some people who know me will tell you. I married my girlfriend after 8 years of living together, slightly marriage phobic, but God said, come on, Paul, we can do this stuff together. I got my relationship back with my son, Clinton, when he was 16, and now he texts me every day. He's living in London, he's just about to get married, and I would say he is my best friend. I have a daughter, Phoebe, who's 21 and just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And I'm doing what I believe God has called me to do. Very graciously, Stephen read out some of the things that I've had the honor, the privilege to be involved in, working with prisoners, the homeless, ex-offenders, addicts, people with mental health issues, just people that Jesus seemed to hang around with. If you open this book, you will really get surprises of who he hang around with. And in 2002, after 3 years of theological training, which I really struggled with, I was ordained into the Church of England as a priest. How that happened, I'm still not sure, but I'm not arguing with it, I'm in. How does all that change start to happen? Well, for me, it's when I decided to listen instead of arguing all the time and being defensive, and started to take some guidance and actually started to read this book, the Bible. And for me, both were a very humbling experience. I never took advice or guidance of anyone, hence my life. But when I started to listen and read, I started to realize that God is working in us all the time. We just don't know that. And I've stopped trying to explain all this stuff to myself most of the time of how it happens. I don't care anymore. I just know he does the stuff, and I know it works. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here tonight, a changed man. But some facts about the Bible I didn't know. You may know them, but I didn't know them at all. I didn't know it was a very popular book. It's the most successful book of all times. If you Google it, over 5 billion have been printed. Every year, 100 million Bibles are sold or given away. It's the top-selling book every single year, so much so that it's never on the best-selling list, because it is always the top-selling book. I didn't know that. In the Times newspaper in 2007, they said this: simply put, the Bible is the most influential book that's ever been written. I also didn't know it was a very powerful book. One former prime minister described the Bible as highly explosive. It has an impact on people who read it. Maybe you've experienced that. One guy I knew in prison, I work in prisons, as Stephen said, one guy I knew, Frank, used to sleep with the Bible on his head. So he'd put the Bible on the pillow, then he'd put his head on the Bible. And he'd have this sort of indentation in his head when I'd see him, these marks. And I'd say to him, Frank, what the heck are you doing? He said, I just want this stuff to go in. So if I sleep on it, it'll probably go in. I want to know the thoughts of God, he would say to me. I also didn't know it's a very precious book. At her coronation, the Queen was presented with a copy of the Bible. And these words were spoken over her by the Archbishop. We present you with this book, the most valuable thing this world affords. The book itself is just a means to an end. It's just, it's just pages with letters and words on them. It's not the words or the paper that counts. You know, for years I carried this Bible around with me, and like I said, I've still got it from that day. I was given it in that recruiting office. But I couldn't understand it. I mean, I've tried to read this when I've been in tricky situations, especially in Northern Ireland or the Falklands or operational tours that I was involved in, or divorces and stuff when I'm sat on my own thinking, was that the right thing to do? I've tried to read this, and I couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me. I couldn't understand the words it was trying to say to me. And I know why now, because I didn't know the author. I didn't understand the author. Because when you know the author, then you start to have a relationship with the person who wrote the book. No one had told me about him. I'd just been given the book. I didn't know about God. I didn't know about Jesus or all this stuff that we're learning on this course. I also didn't know that it's an inspired book. Jesus says, people do not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. It's inspired as it comes out. You know, material things don't really satisfy. I've tried stuffing my life with so many things. They don't sort of satisfy. They fade, whatever they are, whatever money buys. Even the best human relationships don't ultimately satisfy. And I've had quite a few of those as well. There's this sort of spiritual hunger that is in all of us. It's a longing for God. You know, it may manifest itself in different ways, but in every human heart, there's this need to have a relationship with the Creator, or you might say to have a need with someone who's bigger than us, something that's bigger than us that can help us. I would have never admitted that, but I do now. And God's longing to communicate with us, to speak to us. I didn't know that either. He's longing to be in this relationship with us. He loves us. And the primary way that God speaks to us is through the Bible. St. Paul puts it like this: all Scripture is inspired by God. And what does that mean? It means that the Bible is inspired by God. When you read it, it has a ring of truth to it. Maybe you've experienced that. It proves to be inspired. When you start to put some of the things into practice, you'll find that it works. Maybe not in your immediate time, but it starts to work when you practice it. Try it. I learned about the Bible on the Alpha course, on this talk, doing what you're doing now, sat there listening to it. It's there I started to understand what it was trying to say to me, to help me, to guide me. And I found out really on the course that God had this plan for me. And I was really excited by that. Reading the Bible one day, I came across the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament. chapter 29, verse 11. And basically it says that God has a plan for our lives, a plan to prosper us and not to harm us, to give us hope and a future. And when I read that, for me, I was amazed because I love plans. I'm ex-military. I love strategy and plans. And I thought, a plan for me, for Paul Cowley, individually, it was exciting. And those words seemed to sort of be in bold. They stood out. And they were for me. The Bible's in two books, the New Testament and the Old Testament. The Old Testament's at the front and the New Testament's at the back. The Old Testament's the history of the Jewish people. Extraordinary stories of captivity and freedom if you read it. They're just amazing, some of the stuff that they got into. And the New Testament is the life of Jesus and the early church. And goodness me, what some of those men and women got up to and what they went through and what they sacrificed and the stories and the escapes that they got through. It's extraordinary. It was written over 1,600 years by 40 different individuals. Kings, scholars, philosophers, poor people, fishermen, poets, statesmen, historians, doctors, a whole range of different people. Like I say, some professional and some not professional. They're wrote in different styles when you read it. Some as history, some as poetry, some were prophecy, some were sort of love letters. It's all made up of all these different things. So it's 100% the work of human hands. It's a written book that we're familiar with. But the writer says the difference is it's 100% inspired by God. I don't know, an example would be Sir Christopher Wren, probably the greatest English architect of all time, who's known really mostly for building St. Paul's Cathedral. But you know what? He never laid a single brick. He never hammered a nail into a piece of wood. He never shaved anything. He never laid a tile. He never did anything. He started in 1675 at the age of 43. And he finished in 1711 at the age of 79. 36 years of designing that building that's not far from here. But he never laid a single stone. Other people, builders, craftsmen, carpenters, master layers, builders, all those, they built it. But one mind, one architect, one vision over those 36 years, one inspiration, one person behind it, Sir Christopher Wren. And it's the same with the Bible. 1,600 years, 40 different writers, different styles, but one inspiration, one vision, one architect, God himself. That's what that means. It can also be a really difficult read. If you've ever tried to read the Bible, particularly if you've tried to read parts of the Old Testament, you find moral difficulties that you can't just brush over. You know, things that are tough to understand and get your head around. There are different kinds of writing in the Bible. Some lean towards metaphorical, some are full of imagery, some are deeply poetic, like Song of Songs. And you have to read it carefully. Maybe you have to read it a few times. But even after that, we're left with things that are really difficult to understand. Like the issue of suffering, probably the biggest challenge to the Christian faith. And there's no easy answers for that. There's no trite answers to give away for that sort of stuff. And that's difficult. To believe that God is love and yet allows all the suffering that we see all the time when we open every single newspaper, or we turn the TV on to listen to the news, or we hear stories of families or friends. It's difficult to put those two things together, that God loves us but allows suffering. And you can understand why some people reject Christianity on the basis of that. What I'm learning is the more I try and wrestle with those big issues that I've just described, this love of God and this suffering that we find in the world and what we go through, like I said, there are no easy answers. But the more I explore it, the more we wrestle with it, the greater our understanding of suffering and of love will become. God is love, but there are no trite answers to suffering. Try and view the Bible as inspired by God, and then wrestle with those difficulties. Don't give up with it. You're more than that. You're worth more than that. Wrestle with them. Dig in. Don't be scared of them. Ask, seek, understand, the Bible tells us. Tackle those difficult questions. I'm getting old now, and one of the things I've started to do is crosswords, and they're driving me mad. And if you're like me, you can't get anything, and you struggle staring at a page for ages. And then you might get one word, and then you can't get something else. You probably won't throw it away. You'll put it down and go back to it. And then something will come up in your mind, and you'll get another word. Then you'll get another letter. Then you'll find one more word. Then that will give you the letter of another one. And you'll start eventually to finish it. I've not finished one yet, but eventually you'll finish it. Think of the Bible as like a crossword puzzle. The more you read it and the more you tackle it and the more you get into it, the more things will start to link together. How God does that, I have no idea. Not interested, but I know he does that. But don't give up on it. Dig in and wrestle with those things. I didn't know that the Bible was a very practical book either. No idea about that. Bible just isn't inspired or practical. It's been described as a manual for life, with practical wisdom on leading a healthy and fulfilling life. I really wish someone had given it me, or when I did get it at 21, someone told me how to use it. It would have been brilliant. And if you follow it, it says in the Old Testament in Isaiah, it says this, Isaiah 58, verse 11, your life will be like a well-watered garden. I love that imagery of a well-watered garden. I haven't got one, I live in London. But it would be nice to have one. And I imagine what they look like. It's lush, it's dark, it's full of color, it's exciting to be around, it smells nice, it's fresh. That would be like a well-watered garden. That's what God says. If you follow me, I promise your life will be like a well-watered garden. Now, some might say, look, I don't want a rule book. I don't want this stuff. It's full of guidelines and things I can't do, and it spoils my fun. I don't want all these regulations. I want to be free to do what I want and where I want and with whom I want. And if I go around with the Bible, I'm not going to be able to do any of that. It will just spoil all my fun. I'll lose all my freedom, and I won't be able to enjoy life. Question: is that right? Does the Bible take away our freedom, or does it actually give us more freedom? For you to ponder and find out. For me, it's like I live near Stamford Bridge, Chelsea's home. And I love it and I hate it. I hate it because I can't park the car anywhere when Chelsea are playing. It's ridiculous. 80,000 people just come into one small area. But football's been called this beautiful game. But imagine a football match without any rules or regulations. Imagine it without any white lines, no referee, no linesman, no corner flags, no rules, no penalties, no yellow cards, no red cards. It would be absolutely chaos. It still is sometimes with all those. But it would descend into chaos. And God has given us these guidelines on how to live. Not because he wants to spoil our fun, but because he loves us and wants us to have a life that's a well-watered garden. He wants us to enjoy life. He wants our life to be a beautiful game. You know, I've tried life without guidelines, without boundaries, for 40 years of my life, ignoring the rules. And to be honest, you know what? I prefer boundaries. I prefer guidelines. I prefer to know where the lines of the game are, so I can play in it and I can relax. So it's inspired by God. It's God-breathed. It has this power to change lives, and it's changed mine. And the exciting part is it's still working now, and it can change your life tonight, today, tomorrow, whenever, if you get involved in it. I didn't know that God speaks to us through the Bible. The Bible is like a love letter. It's God seen through the lens of Jesus, if you want to think of it that way. When you get a letter from someone you love, you treasure it. I'm sure you do. Not because of the letter itself, it's because you know the person who wrote it, if it's personal. I lived apart from my girlfriend Amanda, who's now my wife, for over 3 years when I was stationed in Gibraltar with an infantry battalion. And those 3 years were hard work to be apart, but we used to write letters to each other. And I've still got some of them here, and I'm certainly not reading them to you, but I kept them. Not because they're just nice, because I know who wrote them. I know the author, and the words are so important to me. I once showed one of these ones that I could show my daughter when she was very young. And I wanted to explain to her what romance is and what life is and everything like that. And I was reading one to her, and she put her fingers in her ears and went, "Daddy, Daddy, shut up, I feel sick." She's getting better now, but the reason I treasure those is I have a relationship with the author. That's why those letters were important to me, and I've kept them because of the relationship I had with the person who wrote them. And the whole point of this book, the Bible, is for you to develop and have and maintain and look into having a relationship with God, with the author. It says in one of the passages in Romans chapter 10:17, faith comes through hearing the word of God. Hearing the word of God. That's where faith comes from. And if you want to grow in faith, I would encourage you to try and read it whenever you can, particularly the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Mark's always my favorite. It's like an action movie. It's moving, it's fast all the time, it's great, but they're all brilliant. And as Martin Luther once said, the Bible is alive. It speaks to me. It has feet. It runs after me. It has hands. It lays hold of me. In other words, it's alive. So how and when should we read the Bible? Anywhere, anytime that you can. There's no rules or regulations of that. Just do it whenever you can. No particular place, no particular time. I'm hopeless at trying to set a time to read this. I've tried for years and I've failed. But what I do try and do is have a discipline to try and read something every day or look at something in there every single day if I can. It doesn't matter how much, but I try and open it. And my part of the deal that I struck with God is, God, I will open it and I will look at it. Your part of the deal is to make it relevant to me. We have this relationship. Try and have a plan if you can. It's better. Time is precious. Find a time, maybe 10 minutes a day. It's up to you. Find a place. You can read it, the bus, the train, the tube, whatever you want to do, somewhere. Just find somewhere and try and dig into it. Find a pattern. And ask God to give you a desire to read it. It's His book. It's His love letter to you. So ask Him, I want to read it, but help me understand it, because I'm really struggling here, God. Or the Bible in 1 year, the app that we talked about at the beginning, which you can download, as we said, for free. Put it on your smartphone. It's brilliant. It's really helped me. I like running, so you can run, you can stick it in, and you can listen to the Bible while you're doing something else. It's fantastic. I read one of the passages. I read Nicky's commentary at the beginning, the story that he puts there. And if I'm pushed for time, I might just go to Pippa's commentary at the end, which is brilliant. Or even listen to it when you're going to bed, to sleep. It's brilliant for getting you to sleep. I always know I've had a good sleep because I wake up and I say to my wife, did you hear Pippa ads? She goes, no. We were well away halfway through Nicky's conversation. So I wouldn't worry too much if you don't understand everything. Like the crossword puzzle, just dig in, just have a look at it. You know, the main question to ask is, what is God saying to me today? And how does it apply to my life? How will it help me? How can it become relevant? And the great thing is, if you start reading this book tonight or tomorrow and you read it every day, in a year you'd have gone through the whole thing. And that sounds a lot, but it isn't if you do a little bit every single day. It's really exciting. It may take you longer than a year. I'm 5 years in and I've not finished it yet, but you'll be faster than me. And don't set yourself unrealistic sort of targets. Just try 5 minutes. Maybe 5 minutes in there, 5 minutes prayer, or 2 minutes, that's it, finish, crack on with your jobs that you're doing. And what I found is the more I pray and the more I read that, the easier it is to read that and pray, if that makes sense. I mentioned my father at the beginning of this talk. He was my hero, really, but a very difficult man to be around. He was a hard man, a heavy drinker, like I said. He was crude. He was very volatile, he was unpredictable, he was violent to everyone around him, including me. And we never really got on. And like I said, at 16, we had that sort of fight. It wasn't really a fight. And he threw me out, and I left home. And I never saw him again for years and years. When I became a Christian, I had this overwhelming desire to see my father. Why? Because I was starting to change. I wanted my dad back in my life. And I went to see him, and you know what? He hadn't changed at all. He just got worse. He'd become older and grumpier and drunker, and it was just... I'd go up to see him in Manchester, and I'd come back again, and it was difficult, and in the end, I started sending him tickets to come down to London, because that was easier, and I'd send him some tickets up, and I'd go and meet him at Euston Station, and he'd be drunk most of the time when he got off, and he'd be whinging and complaining about money that he never had, and I must be a millionaire because I live in London, and why can't he travel first class like everyone else does, and I'm just awful time. Get him home, and then the same thing, he'd start whinging, and it got so bad one of these weekends after me sending tickets up and him coming back drunk and the whinging about the money and all that stuff, and I said to Amanda, do you know what, I can't do this any longer. I've failed. That's me. I'm out of here. It's too painful. I just can't do it. You know, he would come up and he would sit and he would whinge and he would complain and he'd be rude to my daughter Phoebe. She'd take him some toast and he'd ignore her and he'd spill his beer over the carpet, and then he'd argue and he'd swear, and it would just be a complete nightmare. Complain about his lack of money, constantly making me feel guilty. And I said, Amanda, I'm out. I can't do it. I failed. And she said to me, do you know what, Paul? You should pray and read the Bible. That's exactly what I did not want to hear. She said, you should ask God to guide you on how you should be with your dad. I prayed. I really prayed hard. And I looked at the Bible. And at first, it didn't get any better. He was still the same, still the nightmare, still having to stay with us, still complaining about the tickets, the money, the travel. You know, it just a nightmare. It got so bad one day, I had to get out of the house. And I went for a walk. And as I was walking around, I put the Bible app on, and I was listening to it. And I came across this bit in the Old Testament, in the Ten Commandments. And for some reason, some of the scripture stuck out in my ears. And it was the bit in the Ten Commandments where God says that we're meant to honor our mother and father. And I nearly ripped the earplugs out because it's not what I wanted to hear. Not an easy scripture to me to honor any of them, really. But I tried after that. And it did. I tried to honor my father, and it started to get a little bit better. He didn't change, really, but he didn't wind me up as much. Some of the words that he said and the things that he said didn't cut as deep as they used to cut. And on the Sunday, he was traveling back to Manchester. It'd been all right, not been brilliant. We took him to the station, and Amanda and Phoebe were with me, and we put him on the train, and I was about to say goodbye to him, and I saw these words over him: honor your mother and father. And I didn't know what to do. I just looked at my dad, and we were about to get off, and I said, Dad, get up. He said, wait, what? I said, get up. And I dragged him up, and I walked him into the first class compartment, and I sat him down. And I went and bought a very expensive ticket back to Manchester. And as I'd done that and sat him in the first class thing, we got off and we stood on the side and the doors closed. And I saw my father in this seat, in this leather seat. He was like this. He hit the sort of recline button and he went back slightly like this. He took his hat off and put it on the table. He put his hand up like this, and someone brought him a cup over. And he got his paper out and he started to read it. And he turned to me, and it was the biggest smile I'd ever seen in my whole life. And slowly, he started to move out of the station, or the train did, and disappeared up the line. Amanda said to me, what on earth was going on there? I said, you know what? I have no idea. I just wanted to see. I wanted to see my dad happy. I wanted to see him smile. 3 weeks after that, my father died of a massive heart attack on his own in Manchester. Now, was that me deciding to buy a ticket to make him smile? Or was that God helping me. Because after all those years, all those arguments, all that pain, all I'm left with is that picture of my father in first class pulling out of that station. In my opinion, God doesn't want to override us or force us. God doesn't want to make us do things we don't want to do. He walks alongside us. He guides us. He has inspired this book to help us, given us this manual to have a good and fulfilled life, a well-watered garden, as it says. So maybe next time you open this book, try and say to God, as I do every day, can we try and do this stuff together? Would you speak to me? Would you help me as I try and read these words? And let me leave you with one question. Is God trying to speak to you? And if so, will you let him? You just never know what might happen when you open this book. It might just change your life forever. Amen.